So far, we've heard a lot about opportunities in decentralized finance, and Naveed just explained that although it's early stages, there are quite a lot of things to still consider in banking system, and one of those is also security. So given that that's your expert field, Emilie, what would you say, if you had to define one pain point when it comes to security in decentralized finance, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think we've made a lot of progress in terms of smart contract security, in terms of the security of the infrastructure in general, but I think there's still one of the biggest pain points is kind of human security. So phishing attacks, for example, are still a huge kind of risk for people. And no later than this weekend, I was contacted about a phishing attack for 12,000 ETH, so that's like $30 million approximately. And so even people who are very sophisticated users, the phishing attacks are also very sophisticated. So if you think you're interacting with Uniswap or with Circle, like a protocol that you really trust, but actually you're sending money to, Uniswap or something, with a tiny difference in the name that you don't see, or if you think you're copying an address that you're going to send money to, and actually you're not sending money to that protocol or that person, this is a huge risk in crypto, and there are very sophisticated attacks targeting people for that.
If you had to compare Web2 security to Web3 security, what would you say are the main differences? Like, why is it different, and to what extent is it different?
So, in terms of the infrastructure, when you develop a Web3 project, one of my co-founder, Matthias Egli, always uses this analogy that in Web2 security, you kind of have this hard shell and this soft core. So basically, it's really hard to kind of get into this kind of command center of a Web2 company to kind of actually have visibility on the code and so on. But once you go through this hard shell, it's kind of easy then to do whatever you want, right? And to be malicious. Whereas with Web3, there's no shell at all. You're there and your code is visible. And if there are vulnerabilities in your code, then hackers are going to see it, and they have all the time in the world to analyze it and then attack you at the right time when they're ready. So I think this is a very big difference and that's why there's this process in Web3 where you need a lot of eyes on your code. So you need to have this secure development at the beginning, a lot of testing, but also you need audits, then you need bug bounties. So there are a lot of different stages and people who need to look at your code to make sure this facade is secure.
Okay, and that's actually what your company does, right? You literally do the auditing of the code for other companies. So could you maybe walk us through the process of how does one company even approach you? What is it actually that they do? In what stage of their business development do they come to you, and what do you do then?
Yeah, so we generally work with big clients. For example, Circle, the sponsor today, is one of our clients. We work with a lot of the top DeFi protocols like Maker, Curve, Uniswap, Aave, and so on. And so basically, people generally contact us a bit too late sometimes when they're done developing, and we really come in after the development is done, and then we're going to review the code. So it's kind of like quality assurance, basically. We're going to go through the code and really analyze it line by line and see, okay, if I was a hacker, is there a possibility for me to steal the money? So I think I like to compare it. It's kind of like if you look at a legal contract, a smart contract is kind of similar in the sense that if you write poorly your legal contract and you have kind of a very driven lawyer in front of you on the other side, maybe they can use a legal loophole to not give you your money back, or to not give you, or to steal what you have. So this is kind of the same for smart contracts. If you write it poorly, if you make mistakes, then someone in front of you can exploit it. So this is really what we try to check. We check that the specifications work. Something this morning, Anne Grace gave this presentation, and she said, decentralization, is it really decentralized if people don't understand the code, and barely anybody can understand the code? And I think this is a great reflection on this, because this is something that we really try to do. We try to write what is written in the code and to write it in plain English in a report that people can see, this protocol says if I put my money there, if I store my ETH there, I get 4% interest rate every year, let's say. But does the code confirm that? Not many people are able to see this, they can see the promises, and to be honest, it's the same even with Bitcoin, right? Everybody knows 21 million Bitcoins maximum and so on, the total supply, but who here in this room has really checked the code of Bitcoin to say, okay, I know that there's not going to be more than 21 million? Not many people, right? So this is really what we try to do, is we try to make this knowledge more available to people, and so that's why we really write this in our audit reports to confirm the specifications are present in the code. But I think, there's a lot of work to be done in that sense to really show that. So that's one thing we do. We confirm that a protocol does what it says it does, and then we check, of course, that it can't be exploited, and say that's kind of it.
And how do you do it? Like, is there a small army of people just checking like a symbol by symbol in the code, or do you have some very sophisticated tools that you use? Do you use AI nowadays to check for some specifications in the code? How would that go about?
Yeah, so we do have tools that we use. But in general, the tools are not finding the most interesting vulnerabilities. The most interesting vulnerabilities, it's really when you have a few people who have masters in computer science, who look at the code for 3 weeks, and they really think about all the angles, and it's a very difficult way to approach it, because you have to look at the detail of everything, but then you need to have this helicopter view to understand how a protocol works and how it interacts with the rest of DeFi. Because people say DeFi are money Legos. So, basically you have USDC, for example, the Circle stablecoin, and so that is created through smart contracts, and then you're going to have USDC used in another protocol where you can lend money or borrow money, and so that is going to create kind of a derivative of the USDC, and then that derivative is used in another protocol, and so you kind of have these money Legos that fit together, that interlock, and you have to understand, if you're auditing this protocol at the end of the supply chain, let's say, you have to kind of understand this one and this one and this one.
Interdependent all the way.
Yeah,
okay.
And then that kind of creates cascading risk as well. So we were talking about Circle, so USDC. Typically, there's 35 billion worth of US dollars in circulation, so 35 billion USDC. They really can't afford having any risk, right? Because a lot of DeFi is dependent on USDC. So this is something that we would be very mindful of when we're doing an audit for USDC, or for Maker, for DAI, the same. DAI is really one of the pillars of the DeFi ecosystem. So that's more on kind of this helicopter view approach. And now you were talking about AI. A lot of people ask that question, and I think for now, I see some interesting tools that use AI, namely for testing. I've seen more tools like that, where they kind of help you build up your testing suite, but it's maybe not, it's not the last mile, it's the first mile. So kind of getting it up somewhere, a bit like with ChatGPT, You can't count on ChatGPT to have the final amazing work that is perfect, but it can kind of give you this first draft that you need to rework a little bit. I think it's the same now for the testing tools using AI that I've seen. It kind of gives you this basis, and then you have to iterate on it. But I think for now, we don't really see AI as a threat for audit companies, at least for us, because it's such a new space, and you need data to feed these models, right? And the space is evolving so quickly that I don't think there's enough data to train an AI to be able to audit as well as our auditors would. Maybe there's going to be progress, but I think for now, a traditional auditor is still better.
Okay, and then when your team of colleagues actually goes through the code, they use some tools, but they also go through the code, right? through actual specifications. Have you had a situation, do you have an example of exactly that situation when somebody recognized, like connecting a few different dots, that something major is actually at risk, something that you wouldn't see in a single line of code, but when you connect the dots and think about the bigger picture, like it was quite clear that it's something you should intervene in?
Yeah, so it happens quite a lot that we're auditing one protocol, and as we're looking into the other protocols it's supposed to interact with, that we discover a vulnerability in another protocol, right? So then we kind of have to do this responsible disclosures, so kind of reaching out to the protocol, making sure that it's fixed before this becomes public, because typically if we're going to publish an audit report with our findings, some findings could kind of reveal a vulnerability in another protocol, so it's very important to be responsible with that. And I think recently one of the biggest example is we discovered a new type of vulnerability called read-only reentrancy, and there were like $100 million of funds at risk with this. So it was kind of like, okay, we need to go and talk to all the people who have funds at risk. We have to help them kind of mend this, fix this, before this becomes too well known. So we did that. That was in 2022. We did that. We talked to a lot of protocols, helped them fix before we made it public. But then when it became public, it was around DevCon in Bogota, and then it became public, and the protocols who weren't paying attention to this, although everybody shared this, everybody said, okay, you need to update, you need to fix this, some protocols didn't know. So then there was this kind of wave of attacks for read-only reentrancies after we published it. And it's kind of difficult because on the one hand, we did all we could to reach out to all the protocols who were affected, but on the other, a lot of hackers wouldn't have been able to think about this attack themselves, but then when they saw it explained for this one protocol, then they could replicate it for another protocol. And so this is really difficult, and I think this is also why as a developer for a DeFi project, you really have to stay on top of what is current, right, and the current security dialogue in the space.
Yeah, this also adds to what you said, like the comparison between Web 2 and Web 3. Like there is no hard shell, so more you know, like easier it will be to protect it. If I were a DAO, like a decentralized organization, and I needed an audit, what would you advise me how to look for an auditing company? Like what should I be looking for? What should be my expectations of such process?
In the sense of how can you assess if an audit company is good, or what should I do to prepare?
In the sense of if I wanted for my protocol or the project that I'm working on to really be safe, like what should I look for? What should I expect?
Okay. So I think it's important to see an auditor's reputation. I think if an auditor has existed for a few years, it potentially shows that they know what they're talking about. Their track record, have they audited big protocols that have a lot of TVL? So TVL is the amount of money that is locked in a smart contract. And so typically if you've audited protocols that have billions in TVL, and these protocols have been around for years, you could say that hackers probably tried to hack them and couldn't find a way. Otherwise, they would have stolen the money. So this is another thing that's nice with kind of Web3 transparency, is that you can really see history on the blockchain, right? So yeah, on that, so the amount of years that they've existed, the type of protocols they've audited. Yeah, and I think that's really mostly it, I would say. But I think also some audit firms have a lot of churn, so employee turnover, where they might exist for 5 years, but actually the team that was here 5 years ago is, completely gone and it's all new auditors. So I think that's also important, kind of the stability. But yeah, I think I'm maybe a bit biased because this is what we have, so maybe another audit firm would say something else.
Fair. Okay, and if we were to talk about private individuals who maybe want to invest now in a project or become part of it, would you say that these advice also count in that case? Like how how would you assess whether a project or a DAO is not necessarily a good investment, but a good consideration to work with?
Yeah. So yeah, have they been audited by a reputable auditor? I think that's really important. In general, if you want to be safe, I would recommend to go for these blue chip DeFi protocols. So like I said, protocols that have existed for years, that have TVL, so you know it's safer. There is something called the Lindy effect, which I think also applies for DeFi. So the longer technology has been around, the longer it's likely to still be around later. So I think this applies. For me, so some people are degens and think you can trust what's on chain and so on. I think it's also nice to have legal backing and kind of more in the traditional sense. So is the team known? Is the team based in an entity that is kind of regulated? All of that I think is quite interesting. For me, what also brings trust is are they backed by a VC that I know? But in general, it's true, if you're in the space, you can also just ask directly the people who've worked with them and so on. So that's also easier. But yeah, I think good investors, good track record of the team. Are they regulated? Are they audited? Do they have experience building these protocols?
No. Okay.
Sorry, just to say, and before investing, always checking, am I on the right URL? If I'm about to send crypto, am I sending to the right address? This is very, very, very important.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned it, because now we've been talking about things that are pretty much, you can do your due diligence, right? And think about and examine as much as you can about who you work with. But this, when it comes to URL, is more on the side of a human mistake, right? So it can be a legit company or DAO that we want to work with, or entity that we are paying crypto to, but there is an issue with the address. And I actually found a question from the audience, so I thought we might just now turn to that as well. What do you think about poisoning address activities? And do you think it's just a trend or something that's going to stick with the industry?
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if we have the same definition, but I would kind of think it's when people look into your transaction history and they see that you tend to kind of transfer to this address often. And so typically, what people do in crypto is when they're about to make a transfer, the addresses are so long that you kind of check the beginning and the end. And that's something a lot of people do. So if you're able to create a transaction, so like, let's say I have my address, it starts with 1 and ends with 9, right? And that's all I look at. And I interact with that address a lot. And then you have this other person who comes in and then creates another address that starts with 1, ends with 9, but the things in the middle are different, right? The numbers are different. And then they're going to interact with my address. And if I look later at my transaction history, I see, 129, that's probably my address. And then I'm going to send money to that address. So this is something I've heard quite a lot. So me personally, I don't check my history when I have to do that, but it's true. It is a risk. It is a risk, but I think that's why also it's one of the reasons why crypto is a bit unnerving for a lot of people, right? I mean, even me, I've been 7 years in the space. I've made a lot of crypto transactions, but when I make a transaction, I'm always checking 3 times, and I refresh. So is it confirmed, and so on, and it's very stressful, right? So I think it's important to check, to check as much as you can.
Okay. Are there some other cases that you've heard of, like how people end up losing their investment, or not necessarily investment, but a transaction? Like what happens in the space that is sometimes either not doing your due diligence or simply getting screwed over?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, building on what Anne Grace presented this morning, what's great with DeFi is that there are no intermediaries and so on, so that's great. But the problem with that is that if you get hacked, if your money gets stolen, you can't go back in time. So for example, with this guy who was fished for $30 million this weekend, So he reaches out to me. He's like, okay, this protocol, so they use this one coin that we audited, and then he's like, please, can they do something, you know? But they couldn't do anything because it's, it's decentralized, you know, you can't, it's not like a bank where you can stop and take back the funds from the person. So although you're able to know where the funds are, to which pseudonymous address the funds have been sent, you can't do anything. And that is crazy to think that this guy saw his 30 million there, sitting on the address, and nobody could do anything to stop it and recover his funds. So yeah, I think that's pretty terrible, for sure. I mean, if we have some time afterwards, I can talk a little bit about an example where the funds have been recovered. The Euler hack. Yeah, if you want, I can say that afterwards, if, I don't know, if time allows.
I mean, we can, yeah. And then 2 more questions, at least. Yeah.
So the Euler hack is a really interesting example. It happened in March 2023. And $200 million were stolen from this lending protocol called Euler. So a lending protocol kind of like Aave, where you can lend money and borrow money, right? So there is basically a lot of cryptos that are stored in the smart contract of this lending protocol. And this hacker comes, steal $200 million, and then it was a whole race to try to recover the money. In the end, all the money was recovered, and it's really interesting because, again, you don't know who is the person, but you can see, okay, the 200 millions are there, dispatched between these addresses, and so then you start investigating. You know, you try to find any type of hint. It's you know, like a police investigation. You try to find any type of hints to find the person. If you can find the real identity, it's illegal, right? So the police can go and arrest them, but if you don't know who they are, you can't do anything. So basically, they start looking, they try talking to the hacker, they try to put pressure on him. So a lot of projects, when they get hacked, they try to transform a black hat into a white hat. So they try to say, oh, amazing that you found this exploit, thank you for finding this, we'll give you your bug bounty, just send us the fund back, and so on and so on. So that's how people normally do it. Instead, they did the opposite. They were like, okay, if you don't send back by tomorrow, we're going to put a 1 million bounty to whoever has information on you. And so they start pressuring the hacker, and some people, because you can send message, right? You don't know who the person is, but you can send messages on chain. And so then a lot of people then started to send messages to this hacker, including one guy who was like, oh, please, I lost 150K, this is my life savings, I don't know what I'm going to do now. So this hacker doesn't say anything for a while, weirdly kind of sends money to North Korea, to the Lazarus group, kind of a lot of weird transactions and so on. In the end, this guy or girl, we don't know. And in the end, so this guy sends money back to this person who lost the 150K, and they send that money back to them. Kind of, people don't know, is he trolling? Is he kind of trying to make things right? It's really weird, all these actions. He sends a bit of money back to Euler. He sends a bit of money to Tornado Cash, which is this kind of, let's say, protocol that you can use to launder money, if you say. So that's not what they would say. It's a privacy-preserving protocol. But basically, if you send money to Tornado Cash, you can obfuscate the transactions and then send it back to you without being caught. So this hacker sends money to the people who were hacked, money to Euler, money to himself on other address, money to Tornado Cash, money to North Korea. Very weird behavior, you know? Then starts emailing people, starts to want to have phone conversations. So a lot of weird things. But then they kind of keep pressure on him. And we can see from the different transactions that he's making mistakes, he's nervous. So they see that this is a strategy that works, so they keep the pressure. And in the end, the hacker ended up giving all the money back, saying, oh, it was a mistake, I didn't mean to do it, I didn't mean to create any problems for people. But they were kind of able to pinpoint that person and really pressure him because of all the mistakes. So it's kind of, you know, there are instances where if you're facing someone who's not as organized and not as professional, where you can recover your money. And one
if you're an amateur burglar in blockchain, you can be peer pressured into becoming good.
And actually, it's funny because he sent some money to North Korea, to this Lazarus hacking group, and the Lazarus hacking group in return tried to phish that guy. So, so they sent an on-chain message to say, try to decrypt this message and so on. They sent him links so that they could phish him out of the 200 million. So it was kind of funny how this whole, how the events untangled. But in the end, Euler got back their money. And very interestingly, since it was locked in ETH for this whole time, and they got it back later, they made actually $40 million because ETH value increased between the time of the hack and between when the money was given back. So it's like cool. Getting hacked as a service.
Okay, I want to ask you one question that has been liked the most among audience questions, and it's who watches the watchers? And I'll imagine that that's who audits the auditors. If the author doesn't agree, you can shout. But do you feel like you're being watched? Do you feel like who do you reply to? Like, who do you answer to with your work?
So we don't have like a legislator that controls what we do, but I think it's really the market. Since everything is very open, you have to publish your audit reports. So you kind of have this leaderboard of the auditors who get hacked. You have really, the market is really well informed because these DeFi protocols, these are very sophisticated buyers, right? So they do a lot of due diligence. And if you're a bad auditor, you very quickly go out of business. So yeah, I think this is the case. There are some people who are trying, there's like the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, there are a few kind of organizations that try to put some auditors together and create standards. But in the end, again, it's moving so fast that the standard of 1 year ago is very different than the standard now. So it's hard to follow. I think it's really finding the auditor who's always keeping up with the space, but that's difficult.
Okay, that's it from the time we have. Emilie, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.